Hey everyone, it's Thomas Wooden Railway, and on today's Thomas Wooden Railway discussion, I want to investigate a very unique and peculiar piece of rolling stock for the Thomas Wooden Railway line. This is the Chinese dragon in front of you, and there are actually two variations that we are going to look at. The first version on the left was sold from about 1995 until about 2004, and then the second generation of the Chinese dragon was sold from 2005 to around 2008, 2009 or so. And what's really interesting about this specialized piece of rolling stock is that this Chinese dragon character, if you can even call that, was only featured in one Thomas and Friends episode from season 3. The title of the episode was Thomas, Percy, and the Dragon, and it's a very normal, Thomas and Friends episode where something goes wrong and Percy gets scared. I think, he gets trapped in a siding overnight, and then Thomas gets sent to the docks to pick up a special, so to speak, and it ends up being this very, unique and flamboyant Chinese dragon. And as he's puffing along the track in the middle of the night, and in the dark and the fog, Percy wakes up and he sees this dragon traveling along, and he's convinced that, a dragon visited him in the middle of the night. But then the next morning, Thomas arrives at the station, and he's like, "No, Percy, that was me." And then there's some type of moral that, I don't know, like don't be easily scared by things that actually aren't scary or something like that. But the Chinese dragon was only featured in one Thomas and Friends episode. I believe it was actually featured in another learning segment a few years later, but it has a very short history, which is kind of peculiar because for some reason the Thomas Wooden Railway line got two versions of it here, and it was sold for nearly 15 years. So there's kind of something very interesting about this model, and I just wanted to take a closer look at it and kind of see what's the whole appeal of the Chinese dragon in terms of, being a very successful and long-lived Thomas Wooden Railway item. So I'm going to move the 2005-2009 version away, and let's take a look at the first version of the Chinese dragon. Like I said, it was sold for about 10 years, from the middle of the 1990s all the way up until about 2005 or so. So looking at this from a wooden railway perspective, this is actually a very simple Thomas Wooden Railway model. The bottom part here is basically just a piece of flat wood that's been painted red. I kind of think it would be nice. I mean, it's basically an elongated flatbed, and we don't get too many pieces of rolling stock that contain this feature. I can think of the secondary car on the breakdown train that has this, but it's a very short piece. So that's kind of interesting. It's like this long flatbed piece. And what they've done is they've attached another piece of wood up here, and they painted a cute design on the side here, and then the front is the face of the Chinese dragon, and it is entirely made out of plastic. I'll go into that a little bit later. And then they've added this tail/spine area as well, and basically that's the entirety of the Chinese dragon. It's a very simple, basic Thomas Wooden Railway model, but in the scheme of things, back in the mid-1990s, this was your classic, approach to building such a character. You really just take the individual parts and pieces and you plop them together, and that's what you get. So to go a little bit more in depth, first of all, there's this really nice design on the side. For anybody who has experience in the Chinese culture, maybe this design represents something. That would be sort of an interesting fun fact, but to me it just looks like a normal design. Actually, to me, it looks like a bunch of faces with a nose and a red mustache and green ears. Maybe that's just me. Maybe it's one of those situations where once you see it, you can't unsee it. But personally, that's what I see when I look at this design. So a very unique design, unlike anything we've ever seen before on the Thomas Wooden Railway line, and it is copied on the other side here. So the face is made completely out of plastic, and this is a big note because during this part of the Thomas Wooden Railway era, they really tried to limit the amount of plastic that they used in their models. But when you have such an intricate and detailed piece like the face here, unfortunately there's only so much you can do with wood when it comes to designing a piece like this. So I think very reluctantly they used like a plastic mold to design the face, and then they came in and painted, I'm guessing these are like, it's kind of part of the head, part of the hair, part of the dragon, and he actually has his tongue sticking out. And overall, I mean, it's a pretty realistic version of the Chinese dragon when compared to what it looked like in the TV series, in my opinion, at least for the mid-90s. And then, in my opinion, one of the funniest parts of this entire model is this tail here. It literally looks like they took a shoelace and like stapled it in or screwed it in or something. And it runs along this like indented area. Hopefully you guys can see that. Right at the head, the base of the head, there's a little bit of an indentation where this, what looks like to me like a ribbon or a shoelace runs along. And they've just kind of stapled it in. And once it leaves the back of the Chinese dragon, it acts like a tail and it flies up into the air. So to me, that is just simple Thomas Wooden Railway ingenuity right there. I mean, that is extremely creative. Nothing fancy there. Arguably a very inexpensive way to create the tail for the Chinese dragon. But since it is flexible, it rises up pretty high. But if the Chinese dragon were to get pushed through a tunnel or anything, it just gets pushed down. And I mean, it's extremely flexible, and you know, it works in all situations. So to me, the Chinese dragon here, for being based off of just like a couple of scenes from one episode, let's see, you know, this was a season 3 episode, so we're looking at about 1991, and this was introduced in 1995. So a couple years later, they put a lot of, you know, detail and hard work and effort into this toy, in my opinion, considering it only appeared once and it's based off of just a few scenes from one episode. So kudos to the design team. Obviously, you know, there's some fancy parts that they could have added that are missing, but honestly, it's a pretty good representation of the Chinese dragon. I remember seeing this version in stores when I was a kid, and I remember not being too impressed with it because since it is such a specialized piece of merchandise, I really didn't see a use or a need for it in my collection. Remember, this is when I was a kid. I wasn't even doing YouTube videos at the time. I remember thinking to myself, unless I'm going to like recreate the Thomas Percy and the Dragon story, why on earth would I ever need this or want this in my collection? And so that was my mentality for a very long time. And that mentality actually stuck with me up until like a few years ago or so, because to me it was just like, yeah, it's a cool piece, but it's based off of a few scenes from one, I wouldn't say forgettable episode, because the Chinese dragon does make it somewhat memorable, but it's I mean, it's kind of a boring episode until the Chinese dragon gets introduced. So to say I wasn't a fan of this toy as a kid wouldn't be much of a stretch. I just didn't see a need for it. So this version of the Chinese dragon was sold for a number of years, almost 10 years, which is really hard to believe. For some reason, it must have sold either really well, or somebody at Learning Curve had an affinity for this toy and was like, you know what, we're just going to keep the Chinese dragon on the payroll because I really like it, or something like that. But it's hard to believe such a specialized toy could have such a long lifetime in a very competitive, you know, Thomas Wooden Railway line at the time. They were constantly introducing and retiring pieces of merchandise, yet the Chinese dragon mysteriously survived. So my version is from the very late era. The wheels are dated 2003, which means it could be from 2003 or possibly 2004, but this model finally received an upgrade, or I shouldn't say finally, for some reason I should say, it received an upgrade, because at this point in 2005, the Thomas Percy and the Dragon episode is over 15 years old, and this is why I'm kind of confused with the popularity or success of this toy. Either it sold really well, or somebody who was in charge didn't want to give it up that easily. And so instead of simply retiring this piece in 2004, which is what you'd think they would do, considering it's such a specialized piece, instead, we got a reintroduction, or sort of an upgraded model. So this was introduced in 2005. As you can see, there are a number of different changes, most notably the previous red flatbed that the Chinese dragon sat on. It's now sort of a white or a gray color. But we still have red on the bottom here. It's like they took part of that flatbed and just added it to the Chinese dragon design. The face is different. The design is a little bit different. You can see that. It still kind of looks like some faces with curly mustaches and green ears, in my opinion, but not as much as it used to. So the face is different. I'll talk about that in a moment. And probably one of the biggest changes is they did away with this shoelace style where it ran along the back of the Chinese dragon and then up into the air. Instead, this is just a piece of plastic that is, you know, decently flexible. I don't want to move it around too much in case it breaks, but then they actually kind of cheated the system, whereas in the past, to me, this is an entire, you know, block of wood Here, at least at the back of the model, we have this section of plastic where the tail cues into, and so who knows how far this goes into. But you could probably argue there's less wood in this version of the Chinese Dragon. However, the face has received a major upgrade. I think the biggest change, obviously, different from the design, is that for some reason the face sort of sits up, whereas in the past, the Chinese Dragon face just sort of looks straight ahead. This Chinese Dragon's face, he's looking towards the sky, and his eyeballs are painted a little bit weird. He's looking upwards, if you can see that. So I'm kind of confused as to why this is a feature. Is it just meant to bob up and down like that when you hit it? Did they have issues of the previous generation, the face from the previous generation breaking off? Because I don't know, there wasn't enough give and take in this model, so to speak. So they introduced kind of this flexible model so that the face wouldn't break away. I thought maybe the tail is supposed to trigger it, or maybe when you roll the Chinese Dragon model along, it's supposed to bob up and down. It doesn't do any of those things. So right now we have a Chinese Dragon face that not only it's sort of sitting upward, but there is sort of this lever action as well. And maybe somebody with more knowledge on the subject can tell me why that is. Personally, up until I did this review, I just thought it was triggered by something like the wheels or something, but to me, I can't figure out why it's like that. So like I mentioned, whereas in the past we had a Chinese Dragon that was facing frontward and looking straight ahead, we have a Chinese Dragon that's looking up at the sky and wondering why he's here, almost looks like. So those are the big changes. In terms of the design of the face, I think, obviously there's more detail on this face, but I really don't like how it looks up at the sky. It kind of looks like the head is broken to me. If it was flat like that, I'd give it the A-OK, say it looks great. But to me, compared, to what this Chinese Dragon used to look like, it seems like it's broken, just first glance. So I guess that's my only issue with the face. There's more detail on this version, whereas, this dragon had like spikes on the back that they just painted. There's a little bit more detail on the side here. It looks like the dragon actually has ears this time. So the faces are good in their own way. I mean, this is a very 1990s face, and so it's kind of glad we got an updated version. I wouldn't really call one better than the other, though, because, well, maybe I call this one a little bit better, but they're both unique in their own way. And in a strange way, I kind of miss the shoelace design just because it was so, I don't know, primitive and just totally out of left field. Like, whose idea was like, okay, they could have easily, I think, they knew plastic existed. They could have added a plastic tail to the back here on this model, but instead they chose a very inexpensive red shoelace. Or, I mean, I really don't know what the material is, but to me that's just ultimately super creative. Maybe looking back on it now, it's a little bit cheap, but on this Chinese Dragon, they did go ahead with the plastic tail. Looks a little bit like licorice to me. That's just my opinion. And then we have sort of this weird, I think this has to do with the head lever. We have this weird, some sort of contraption or compartment on this version of the Chinese Dragon that kind of interrupts the nice design we had on this one. So, I mentioned before, this Chinese Dragon was sold for a far less amount of time. It was only sold for around 4 or 5 years, and then it was finally retired in like 2009. So, the point of these discussions is to sort of engage in a conversation with everybody in the comments about what they think about the items I'm reviewing and such. So, first of all, I have a couple of questions. What does this design look like to you? I've already said it kind of looks like a face with a mustache and green ears. Maybe it looks like something completely different to you. If I turn it on its side here or upside down, it kind of starts to look completely different. So a nice, I guess, postmodern piece of art on the side of this Chinese Dragon. The second question, which face do you prefer? I prefer this one just slightly more than this, although I guess I could take some glue or something and tape it down, but I really don't want it to be a permanent thing. I just wish it was looking ahead like this one and that the eyes were more centered or more focused on what's ahead, because it's literally just looking up at the sky right now. And third, why do you guys think this item was around for so long? To me, I am just absolutely confused, and I really have no explanation other than somebody at Learning Curve really liked this toy and refused to let it go by the wayside. This is based off, I mean, the Chinese Dragon was on screen for maybe like a minute and a half of that episode from season 3, And yet we got, I mean, I think a piece of merchandise is completely fine because we see that nowadays. We see a special engine or a unique piece of rolling stock introduced, and usually, hopefully, we get merchandise for it. But the fact that the Chinese Dragon lasted so long, this one lasted 10 years, and then this one lasted another 5. I mean, the Chinese Dragon outlasted iconic pieces of rolling stock like the express coaches, I think. The Chinese Dragon was around longer than that. And the Great Troublesome Truck, obviously, and just a number of other really just, I'd say, more iconic and more useful pieces of rolling stock, in my opinion. Like I said earlier, as a kid, I thought, I have no use for this unless I'm recreating the episode. So let me know in the comments, why do you guys think this item lasted so long? Maybe I'm an anomaly to the situation. I didn't think it was that big of a deal as a kid, but maybe kids really like this toy, and maybe it's sold well every year. And so that's why they kept it around. What are your thoughts on this toy just as part of the Thomas Wooden Railway line? I had no desire up until a few years ago to pick these two up because, like I said, I don't really have any use for it in my series unless I was doing like a blatant ripoff of the Thomas Percy and the Dragon episode, or I was doing like a remake of it. And I actually received this in a lot. It was like a Craigslist deal, a local Craigslist deal. It was a bunch of trains, and so it came with this, or this was one of the items included, and it was in, I mean, it's in remarkable condition. It doesn't even look like it's been played with. Maybe that sort of tells the tale as to how popular it was. But then when I decided, you know, I was thinking of review ideas, I was like, well, I should pick up the old version just so I can compare and contrast. And that's really the only reason I've picked up these two models. You see them sometimes in the background of my series, but they're usually just chilling in the yard, not doing anything important. So I would love to hear your guys' thoughts, theories as to why the Chinese Dragon was around for so long. I can't come up with anything conclusive. My biggest guess is that either it was like an underground bestseller that I don't know anything about, or somebody at Learning Curve just really liked this, and since they have the power when it comes to deciding which toys stay and which ones go, they just kept it around. So I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts. As always, thanks for watching this very long video. And if you watched my previous video on Sir Topham Hatt's car, I want to sincerely apologize for the audio issues I had there. I got a new camera. I've been having some technical issues with it, so I'm back on my old camera, hopefully just for this video, but who knows, maybe some future ones. So I apologize for that in advance. I didn't mean for those audio issues to detract from the video itself. But anyway, thanks for tuning into another Thomas Wooden Railway discussion. Like I said, I'm always open to hearing your thoughts and theories as to why this item lasted for 15 years, whereas, you know, more common items, more, I don't know, desirable items in the Thomas Wooden Railway line received, you know, 4 or 5 years on the shelf at most. So just let me know what you guys think. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I guess I'll wish everybody out there a happy Chinese New Year for 2018, since that is starting today. So everybody out there, thanks for watching, happy Chinese New Year, and I'll see you on the next video.